What's up, everyone? Welcome to the latest episode of HashKey Learn, where we speak to experts in the crypto industry to understand a bit more about what's going on in the world of digital assets. Now, today we are going to talk about a very familiar topic to most of you in terms of the term Web3. Now, probably most of you, have heard of, what the term Web3 is, but there's actually more to it. And today we have my colleague, Ben Albaz, head of ecosystems at HashKey Group, to break apart why Web3 matters, the difference between Web3 and Web2, and how we as consumers will be affected by Web3. So I guess, Ben, let's dive straight into it, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So let's kind of set the scene. Can you give us a quick definition of what Web3 is?
Yeah. No, I think this is it's a very pertinent topic right now, right? And we're coming to you live from our offices here in Hong Kong, right? So it's a nice environment to share this. I think it's if you look at kind of the history of how things have worked out, right? Web 1, Web 2, Web 3. Before skipping to Web 3 and talking about that, it is helpful to think about where we've come from, right? The first generation of the web essentially was it was a read-only version of information online, right? You go to a web page and it just kind of tells you what's on there and you just read it, right? There's not much collaboration back and forth. And then you had the second generation, right, which started to come out in kind of the 2000s web 2.0, which is essentially became this read-write version, right? Not only were you passive, but now folks who logged onto the web and got involved in different apps and platforms, you could actually write content, right? You could start sharing content, right? The user-generated content boom, right? And that was really, you look at 2005 to 2009, you started to have the growth of these social media platforms, right? Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, where users actually generating a lot of that content that others are reading, and it kind of creates this nice feedback loop, right? So you have to ask yourself, well, what's wrong? Why that sounds great. Everyone's using these apps, everything's happening. Well, the challenge is that these apps have become so popular, right, that everyone is just using them. And they have no choice but to kind of centralize the management of how the apps work, and identity is really managed all by these centralized platforms. And as everyone knows, right, that the data that you generate on all these platforms is very, very valuable. If you don't like what one of these platforms is doing with your data, can you move somewhere else? Well, now it's very difficult because you don't even own your own identity, right? Yep. So I think that's what's led to this whole boom around Web 3.0, which is kind of it's an overarching theme that is combining elements of cryptography and also elements of blockchain, and also incentivization using digital tokens to really show what it would be like in a new era where users who use web platforms actually have a greater stake in that platform, or they have greater control over their data and their identity. So essentially, putting that summarizing it more succinctly, it's Web3 is almost like the read, write, own version of the web, right? Where users now actually have a little bit more ownership over their data and their identity.
Now, I guess over the past year, we've heard so many people mention about Web3. The news media talking about it, influencers are kind of hyping about it. So I guess everyone wants to know, why should we care about Web3?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think again, and this is I think it's incredibly important because if you look at the history of the growth of the internet, huge business models, huge businesses and revolutionary innovative business models have all grown from these next generations of the web, right? Yep. Whether it was the Web 1.0 era to the Web 2.0 era. The Web 1.0 is more walled gardens and guys like AOL and these types of folks. And then Web 2.0, obviously you have the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters of the world. So large businesses and large ecosystems are built in each era, right? So why people should care about Web3? I mean, I think there's two sides of it, right? One side is that there's going to be phenomenally high value that's created in terms of businesses. I think another area that's very interesting is the user experience in this new era is going to be very different than what people have experienced in the past, right? And it's happening a little bit in its embryonic stage right now, but essentially, users having a little bit more of a stake in the apps that they use or the games that they play is actually very, very important. Reducing the cost of transacting in different ways. I think the two reasons people should care is it's going to create some very large businesses going forward. Those businesses might not look like traditional business in terms of they might not be companies, they might be communities, or kind of associations of people. This is not a talk on DAOs, right? So it's even a more interesting conversation.
Maybe next time.
Yeah, but user experience is also much different. And it's actually more power and more values kind of transferred back to the user rather than to the internet platforms.
Now, let's get more specific. You mentioned about consumers, right? You and I, we're both consumers of the internet, and I'm sure most of you are also consumers of the internet. How exactly does Web3 change the way we consume the web? For example, purchasing behaviors. Like, how does Web3 change that?
Yeah, so I think purchasing behavior. So I think all purchasing obviously involves payments and it involves accounts, right? So in a Web 2.0 world, right, when you want access to a wallet, right, or you want access to an app, you're using kind of like all these different siloed identities, right? And you don't even own like the data that's generated when you what I mean by identity in this case is like an account, right? An account with a wallet or an account with an app. From the consumer's point of view, in an ideal, right, we're not there yet, right? But like in an ideal Web 3.0 experience, right, the user should have one identity, right? Maybe they have a few, right? But they should have one blockchain-based identity that they truly own, that they control the keys to, and they can actually have more control over how their data is accessed by third parties. That level of control over your data and what you can log into, I think, is actually very, it's a very, very important thing for users going forward. I think the other thing that's interesting is the ability to kind of capture more value from what you do on some of these platforms, whether it's games, whether it's social media platforms. I think having like native built-in tokens or some type of payments currency is very important, right? The majority of apps out there, like the integrations with the normal fiat banking channels and fiat payments, like generally speaking, it can be a little bit, the transaction costs might be higher. Sometimes like the settlement costs or the settlement speeds are a little bit slow. So I think you've already started to see in the market, a lot of different experimentations with using, stablecoin payments for some of these platforms. Sometimes these apps are using, native currencies to settle payments between users and developers. There's even some examples of just using Bitcoin as the payments, settlement. So anyway, making identity and accounts much easier, more seamless for users, allowing users to have more control over their data. And then also, making payments, much more streamlined. They're kind of, I think, the key benefits to consumers.
Now, Ben, what are the most common misconceptions that you've heard people talk about Web3 these days?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a few, right? I think a number of misconceptions are, I think you can't go around and assume that Web 3.0 and blockchain and crypto are going to solve every problem out there, right? I think you have to be very, in terms of applications and the intent for what you're doing, you have to be very clear on what the pain points are, right? Like what are the pain points for users, and how will this different technological solution actually solve that, right? I think what we have seen too much is in any of these eras, right, whether it's Web 1, Web 2, Web 3, because it is such a foundational opportunity and change, there's a lot of hype in the industry, right? And with a lot of hype comes a lot of noise. And folks who think, hey, I'm just going to take this solution and apply it to something that it should be applied to, right? So I think the misconceptions, to answer the question, right, misconception number one, Web 3.0 is not the perfect solution to every problem. And I think that's probably one of the most important misconceptions out there. I think the only other misconception that I would highlight would be, I think the use of blockchain and cryptography, it has these security benefits, right? People think, oh, you use the technology, Web 3.0 apps, they give better control over your identity and your keys, and it's safer. But I would say, in terms of safety and security, you have to be really specific on what the security benefit is to the user, right? So I think misconception 2 is like, oh, use blockchain, so all the data is safe and it's more secure. It really depends on how like the specifics of how the app is designed and like how the user is actually maintaining control over their account, and how can they recover it, and what is the underlying blockchain technology being used. So it really, I think misconception 2 is that blockchain is always like a more secure and preferable solution to the users. In some case, like it really depends on what the risks are to the users in using this type of app.
Crypto exists, NFT exists. They are the foundational blocks of Web3. But I think it's fair to say that we're still not there yet towards Web3. Some view it as still, a abstract concept. So what do you think are the obstacle and challenges that must be overcome in order to make Web3 become, or like fulfill its biggest potential?
And I still think that I said this a few years ago. I still think it's the case now. It's a number of different things. It's we're basically talking about mass adoption, right? What is limiting mass adoption? I still think there's two big barriers to that. One is user experience. Like I still think we're still not there in terms of user experience. Like just for those of you who don't have the experience, right? The normal like Web 3.0 app experience is users have to download, like a Web 3.0 wallet, right? Blockchain wallet. It's either something like Ethereum, like MetaMask, or other chains have different wallets, right? And for the savvy folks out there, it's like you get the hang of it, you know how it works, right? But for like a normal user, the process of going in and setting up a wallet, and then I have this concept of my keys, and I have to manage my keys. I can never lose them. If I lose them, I lose access to my account, right? Some of these things are actually quite challenging to the normal user. So user experience is one side of things. I think the other thing that's a little bit challenging to mass adoption is, and it's almost like I heard this term I think like 3 or 4 years ago, right? It's called the curse of liquidity, right? Which is like the benefit of doing all this, Web 3.0 apps and like all the assets that users generate in these different platforms. The benefit, a really clear benefit, is like liquidity of your assets, right? Whether it's a game, whether it's metaverse, whether it's DeFi, like if you own some type of asset in the game or whatever environment, you can transfer, right? It's liquid. You can do a lot of things with it, but that does create some challenges and some risk, which is like there's a lot of different exchanges and swaps that you can use to like lever up on your assets, and that might cause some users to lose more than they can, right? So I think user experience. I think there's also users' understanding of the risks. And I think the third one, which is I think the third category of barriers would be still, I think, in the technical scalability side. So even if there's been a lot of other approaches with other blockchains that can support higher transaction output to support millions and tens of millions of users, but I still think we're still not there in terms of like a Web 3.0 architecture that can support billions of users.
Final question and closing thoughts. In your opinion, do you think Web3 will ever take off? And if yes, how far are we away from it?
Yeah, and I think my perspective on this, I say this a lot, is like I think yes. My answer to that question is yes. And I think some people, I think there's definitely a pattern in terms of innovative technologies, and that it comes from Clayton Christensen, his disruptive innovation model, competitive strategy and things like that, which is taught in a bunch of business schools, which is that whenever there's like a foundational innovative technology that comes into the market, you essentially have two participants, right? You have the incumbents and you have the new entrants. And like day one, when this technology is introduced, and there's some new entrants that are using it, let's say the Web 3.0 apps, for example, versus the Web 2.0 companies, because the technology and user experience isn't there, people tend to like cast it off, like, oh, it's just a toy, it's never going to work, right? But that's on day one, right? And then or year one, right? And then year 100, like day 100 or year 2 or after what time period, like the technology is the technology and user experience for this foundational technology is increasing incrementally, right? But the incumbents are kind of just staying with the status quo. So anyway, that trend continues until there's a tipping point in which the foundational technology is good enough in terms of user experience and also in terms of capacity, and that it provides like a better provides a just a good enough experience for users at a much lower transaction cost or some other cost of usage, right? So I think where we are in this process today is we're probably about halfway through there. In terms of how long it's going to take, 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, I think there's a lot of amazing companies doing great work on this, and I think it's going to happen, right? So I think we're probably halfway there. Maybe the second half passes faster than the first half, but I think you got to watch out for how the technology is developing and how new apps that get introduced every year, how the user experience is increasing, right? Like even 2022 versus 2021, kind of like the quality of the user experience and the user interfaces are all increasing quite rapidly. So
yeah, and I think the great thing about this space is we're seeing so many different apps developed every single day, and that all helps propel, the eventual future and the eventual development of Web3, right?
Yeah, and there's all new concepts, right? The whole space around NFTs is really bringing the concept of tokens and ownership, proof of ownership of different digital items and games or whatever. It's bringing it to a wider mainstream audience. So I think these are all different, different things. There's a lot of hype and there's a lot of noise, but all this put together, like for every cycle, it increases people's awareness of what these technologies and apps are.
Well, I think that's a good note to also end today's conversation. Well, thank you, Ben, for sharing everything about Web3. Now, if you guys are watching this on YouTube, be sure to leave a like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Take care.
Thanks.